Welcome to the Building Spirit-Filled Homes podcast by Red Mountain Community Church. This podcast exists to help us engage with a variety of topics through a biblical lens. It is our prayer that we'll take all that we learn from these conversations and apply them to our lives so that we can make a kingdom impact on those around us, starting in our home. Thanks for joining us for our conversation today. All right, we're back with another Building Spirit-Filled Homes podcast with Perry Emerick, who is a Christian counselor, part of the Christian Counseling Services Network, and we're excited to have him back to talk about conflict in marriage, which is always a fun thing to talk about that none of us have issues with. So we're super excited to just engage in this space with you guys again, to provide some tools and some practices and really a better understanding with grace to know how we can care for each other well and love like Jesus. So thanks for joining us for another podcast. All right, Perry, you're back again.
Yes.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time.
So
everybody thinks I only have one wardrobe here.
yeah, right. Yeah. So conflict in marriage, right, is just a normal, something that's just normal, and yet there's ways to find life and practice that better and grow in that. And so in your experience as a therapist, as a Christian counselor, what are some tools or practices or just understandings, right? It's not just always about tools or practices, but what's the deeper thing that you see when it comes to conflict that could help bless some marriages and families to understand maybe how to do that well, or even just understand it? Like, why are we in conflict?
Yeah. So obviously, being a therapist, I get couples who come in all the time, and usually they're coming in because it's crisis time.
Sure. Yeah.
And, there's a thing called the self-serving bias, right? Which, the problem's not me, it's you.
Right.
And, therapist Perry, if you can just, fix my partner because
Right.
they're the problem, then this will go away, right? And that's very common. Again, I don't want to, overstate that. There's certainly people who are self-aware enough to go, I know this is me or whatever it is. But, often that's what we're doing. We're coming in and we go, hey, we just got a communication problem, or we just have, a disagreement we're having on this thing or whatever it is. And I think the first thing sometimes to stop and maybe consider, I'll say it that way,
Sure.
is, where is it that we learned kind of how we show up in marriages?
Okay.
And what we often talk about is our marital problems actually begin in our childhood, in the sense that that's where we kind of figure out kind of our identity. That's how sometimes, we experience things that, as I've kind of mentioned at other times, we experience things that in our attempt to make sense of it might leave us with some sense of insecurity, might leave us with some sense of there's something deficient about me or whatever it is. And then what we do is we develop these two strategies. And one is, how do I feel better? We talked about that in the other video, right? About kind of the sin strategies. But the other one is, how do I be safe? And what I really resonate with is, you might be familiar with like attachment styles. Have you heard those?
Yeah.
Like there's avoidant, and there's anxious avoidant, and all these different things. And I'm really a fan of the material from How We Love. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
The Yurkoviches, Marlon and
It's a great
Kay.
book.
And they kind of identified these, well, there's technically 6. There's secure, which we all aspire
That's
to
the
be,
goal, right?
That's the goal. And there is the thing called earned security, but there's these 5: avoider, pleaser, vacillator, controller, and victim.
Okay.
And one of the first things I try to do is try to help each partner in the marriage understand or come to an awareness of is, what's my attachment style? And what I've discovered is each of those attachment styles kind of come with a pattern of kind of behaviors and beliefs. And often what's happening is it's that pattern of behaviors that style, which is really about protecting me, conflicts with or interacts with somebody who typically has a different attachment style.
Okay.
And so, like, my natural style is an avoider.
Okay.
And so, avoiders, it's just what it sounds like.
Yeah.
I want to avoid conflict. I don't want to rock the boat. I was hyper vigilant about reading everybody's mood because I
Okay.
wanted to make sure that I did everything I can to avoid,
Mm.
triggering some big reaction,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to keep myself safe.
Mm.
Okay. And if it gets too hot, I'm going to do one of two things. I'm either going to get very defensive,
Mm.
right? Because I feel attacked unfairly
Sure.
and I'm going to defend myself. Or I'm going to, like, at some point, I'm probably going to start with that, but
Yeah.
I'm going to exit stage left here. I'm
Yeah.
out, right? But then there's pleasers. And what pleasers are doing is they're doing the same thing as an avoider, but rather than kind of running away,
Mm.
they run in to try to fix it.
Uh,
I want to make you feel better. What do you need?
Sure.
Because they can't relax unless you're okay. So they're trying to make everything better. Now, the vacillator is interesting because vacillators are trying to create this ideal. They kind of act like a pleaser at first,
Okay.
and they're trying to make everything ideal. But then when something gets stirred up in them or anxiousness kind of trips, whatever, they can kind of present in a little bit of a controller type way. Like they get angry, they get really intense, they get very direct. And again, it's their attempt to try to protect themselves, right?
Okay.
I'm either going to make everything just right so I can be okay, but if
Mm.
that tension rises, I'm going to kick in here and try to fix it in a
Mm.
very intense way because I'm not doing okay.
Right.
Controllers, right? I will never be vulnerable.
Mm.
I will always use power and control as a way of protecting my vulnerabilities. And then the victim is very similar to the controller. They just go the other end is I'm powerless to change anything
Yes.
here. So I'm going to just kind of live in that. But they still find ways of being subversive even as a victim. But all of these are really important because they can begin to shed light on like, what am I doing to be okay?
Mm.
And when one marries another, what we think is communication problems or all these things
Right.
is actually one strategy that gets triggered by the other strategy,
Mm.
which then triggers the first, and that creates this cycle, right? And so one of the ones I see very commonly is as an avoider or a pleaser.
Okay.
And let's say most Christians who are avoiders try to be pleasers up to a point,
Okay.
right? Because, we're trying to be good people, right?
Yeah.
But they'll often marry like a vacillator.
Ah.
And those two, again, great people. Like, this is not an indictment on anybody's character.
Yeah.
But what it creates is a dynamic that can create a lot of conflict and a lot of hurt and a lot of hardships. And so let me give you a couple examples that I encounter a lot.
Okay.
So the one is, and especially in this avoider, vacillator kind of dynamic is what they call it, is for the avoider especially, there's this fear of getting in trouble.
Okay.
Like they're walking on eggshells.
Sure.
And they are constantly living in this space of, being super attentive to the mood and the emotions of their partner. And they're really trying hard to do everything they can to avoid getting in trouble. Right.
Yeah.
And I'll even ask that sometimes, like, are you afraid of getting in trouble with,
Sure.
And they'll be like, well, yeah. And so when we stop back though, and sometimes we've normalized that, right? Happy wife, happy life, or whatever, keep the husband happy and everything's happy run out, right? We normalize that. But when you stop to think about that, like that's kind of a parent-child dynamic, right?
Yeah.
When you really kind of
get in trouble,
right?
Yeah.
I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah. What
And
makes
part
mom
of what,
happy?
right? And part of what I don't want to get in trouble means is I am responsible for whatever the angry or the reactive, whatever partner, I'm responsible to make sure they're okay so that I can be okay.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
And so that can create all kinds of real big intention or conflict and challenges. I would even say insecurity. Right.
Yeah.
Because this partner inherently knows that this partner is like not trustworthy. It's like they're not really there for them. They're there for themselves. And that fosters a bit of this insecurity. So one of the things I try to teach that dynamic is
sure.
trying to get them to kind of first just notice this, but to recognize in this dynamic, the value, if there's a higher value, is keeping myself safe. And it's really for both sides because that's what they're trying to do as well. They don't like being the one who, like, that doesn't feel good to any of it.
Sure.
And so it's trying to help them see as a married couple, the higher value isn't how do I keep myself safe, but rather how do we work together, because the marriage requires us to work together to understand and to love each other and to work towards growth.
Sure.
And so what this, avoid getting in trouble person needs to do
Sure.
is recognize my job isn't to avoid stirring up and getting things. It's to lean in and meet them as a partner. And that's scary.
Sure.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Because this partner might present when they're really triggered or frustrated in a very strong reactive way, which scares the heck out of this,
Yeah.
And yet, what we want to begin to think about is, I married this person because I believe that they love me and they want to be close to me.
Yeah.
So that needs to be the main shift is this person isn't trying to punish me. This person is trying to be close to me, which means if there's a conflict, my job is not to run away to be okay. It's to lean in so that we strengthen and build greater security in the relationship, which requires a lot of skill, right?
Sure.
It requires, I have to learn how to listen to understand versus listen to defend. But I'm listening to defend to avoid.
And that's a habit you've developed for decades.
That's why I say it begins in our childhood, right? And same with the one who's more maybe demonstrative. That's often what they've needed to do to be seen maybe in their home is they've sometimes had to act out really strong ways.
So what's a way? It sounds like first you need to understand where you're coming from, right? You need to understand kind of like how you love, right?
Totally.
Which one of the person I'm.
Totally.
And then you can understand, well, I understand who I am, and then I can also understand who my spouse is. So these are kind of the ways they respond. But how do you get them to a place where they can slow their roll enough to realize, oh, we're both responding out of the way we've been responding dysfunctionally, let's just say, or protectively. Maybe dysfunctional is too strong a word. For years, to pause to say, hey, we're actually for each other's security, safety, connection. We're not actually battling here. We're just, in a sense, misunderstanding each other because of our own stuff.
Right. And I think this comes back to maybe a better understanding of intentions, right? So one of the things I think happens a ton is, in conflict, right? Like often what one partner, really both partners will do is we will defend our intentions, even in situations where maybe a behavior was received in a way that was hurtful. Okay. And so, you kind of know how the dynamic works, right? Let's just say, your wife is frustrated and she says, hey, I can't believe you didn't unload the dishwasher. You said you were going to unload the dishwasher and you totally didn't do it. You don't even care about me. Right. Now, I'm sure your wife would never say that, right? But sometimes that's how something gets communicated, right?
Yeah.
And so what do? Right? Well, we instantly go to defend our intentions. Well, I didn't mean to do that. I got distracted and this thing came up and, work call, I had this crisis thing and I wasn't able to get to it. But hey, you shouldn't feel that mad about it because, that's not what I meant to do. And again, this just creates so much conflict.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so one of the things another strategy, another thing that we can begin to do is we need to step back. And this is where I always go back to, we got to have curiosity. We need to have compassion. And how that plays out sometimes is, first off, we need to recognize it's hard to defend a hurtful behavior in the name of a good intention. In fact, I would say it contradicts the very thing we're saying we have.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, who is my good intention for? if I'm defending an action that communicated to somebody else that I didn't care, what am I actually defending?
Yeah.
In many ways, like I'm contradicting
Right.
what I'm actually saying,
Same.
right? And really my intention in that moment is protect myself versus to care about you and try to understand and meet you and respond well. And so what I try to invite, us to do, I say us, I'm guilty of it
Sure,
all the
right.
time. And it really goes both ways, depending on no matter what your kind of attachment style is, because we all can default to my intention as being the kind of the trump card that trumps your
Yours,
feelings, right?
justified or
Right.
whatever.
And when you do that, what you're basically saying is you have no right to feel the way you do. And so,
Which is totally helpful.
too bad, right? Which
Right.
is not loving at
No.
all. So here's what I try to invite. Again, we have to stop and think about this, because then if we can think about it, reflect on it, and notice it, hopefully we can begin to catch ourselves even after the fact, to come back and acknowledge that we did this. But it's to recognize, if your intention really was good, then your response needs to reflect that. So in this example with the dishwasher, right? It's like, you know what? You're right. I did not unload the dishwasher, and I told you I would, and I can get why you're upset.
So it's so the response is really, instead of sharing intentions, which is actually in conflict,
Right.
it's taking responsibility and in being for the other person, meeting them with compassion and love, and saying, hey, and with a desire to understand their feelings.
Totally.
Whether or not I was right, wrong, or indifferent, it doesn't matter, because this is how it affected you.
Totally.
And I'm sorry.
Right.
Which seems like so simple.
It seems so simple, but our insecurity sometimes prevents us from doing that. Like, I have to defend my honor, and I have to defend my character, and I have to defend whatever these things are. And I would just say that, as a therapist, tells me you've got a lot of insecurity in you. So you're more protecting against your insecurity versus loving your partner and trying to do anything that's mending and repairing there.
Okay.
So learning how to kind of, and sometimes, like, right away, we've got to sit there and go, okay, she's mad, he's mad, whatever it is. And we want to just to stop and go, okay, first off, is it true? Is what they're saying. Now, again, what we get stuck on, because the way it gets communicated is, you intentionally didn't do that.
Okay.
And that's the part that ends up like getting us stuck.
Get stuck.
And all I try to say to that is, try to have enough grace for the person to recognize that's what feels true in their body. But just because that's what feels true to them doesn't make it true of me. What I have the opportunity to do is to acknowledge, you know what, you're right. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that you're upset. All I can tell you is, I'm sorry. I meant to do that. I got distracted. I should have communicated. I will take care of that.
Yeah.
Or if it's something else, like maybe it's something else entirely. And, we feel like, we really genuinely felt like, man, I was trying to do something helpful. And they're like, well, that felt like this to me. Again, how do we honor our intention? We say, you know what? Obviously, that was not the heart of what I was trying to do, but that's how you experience it. And I'm sorry. How could I have done that differently?
Now, do you find when people do that, when they own that and they do that well, right? They're growing, they're learning to do that well. Does the other person respond well to that? Or is that also kind of a growth track of like taking that as truth versus you're just trying to get out of the situation?
I think it depends.
Okay.
Time will tell.
What
I think it does is ultimately it does build trust.
Yeah. Because I feel like what you're explaining similarly happened with my wife and I this week. And in my mind, right, I was like, well, my intention, I wanted to defend, my intentions are this, but I just felt like the Holy Spirit saying, just own it.
Just own it.
Just say, and I did. And then my wife received it with forgiveness.
Totally.
And so I was like, oh, that was way easier, because then we didn't get in that cycle of, you don't see me, you don't know me. And it's not because we don't love each other, because we do, but like, it's very simple to get in that cycle of kind of protecting and insecurities and everything that you've talked about. So I was just curious if that takes time to have that met with like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a pattern of doing the defensiveness,
Okay.
the first time you do that, first few times, it might be like met with some suspicion.
Sure.
Right.
Which is fair, I
But the
think.
more that you can take ownership of it
Mm.
and recognize, like, I'm missing that does not mean I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
It means in a snapshot in time, I missed an opportunity.
Mm.
And that's where we have to do our own work of realizing if they're telling me that I'm this person, I get to choose whether that's a description of my whole personhood
Mm.
or is it acknowledgement of in that moment,
Sure.
that's how that was received. And can I have
Mm.
compassion and acknowledge, okay, yeah, I could see how you'd feel that way.
Mm.
I'm sorry. I'll work on that. And again, no big promise. I'll never do that again. That doesn't
Sure.
work. That actually
Right.
decreases trust.
Sure.
But when we can acknowledge it and say, you know what, I will work on that.
Well, it
That's
reminds me
important
of
to you, and I will work on that.
really the pathway that God has given us, which is confession, right? Owning it, and then repentance is actually learning and growing from it, and actually not doing it again.
Right.
So now, and again, not that we're never going to do it again, but it'll happen less and less as we, pause in that moment and just.
And I think that the core of it is, when I get defensive, often that's coming out of a judgment against myself. Like I feel dumb or I feel attacked, or usually I know like they're right, but
Sure.
and so it's coming out of that place. This is where I'm going. The beautiful thing about how Jesus met us is he always met us with compassion.
Mm.
And so I think, how do we love ourselves with a Christ-like compassion that then opens up the opportunity to then love our partner like that? You see, there's that passage that talks about out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yeah.
And sometimes we are so hard on ourselves and so judgmental on ourselves that the overflow of our heart comes out that way to those we love most.
Right.
So that's where our intentions now lose credibility. When we can actually give ourselves permission to go, you know what, I am human, I'm a snapshot in time, I'm continuing to learn and grow. God continues to work on, be renewed in your mind is like, just because you come out of the water, you're not renewed.
Right.
You're a new creation.
Sure.
But the new creation has to learn how to be the
That's
full creation, right?
That fun sanctification process, right?
Exactly, right. So how do I be kind and compassionate to myself that I am in a process? And it's okay in the sense that it doesn't eternally define my personhood. If in a moment I missed it, can I be compassionate? Can I acknowledge that? And that's what love requires in a marriage, especially, is learning how to go, you know what, you're right, I missed that one.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can't do it in the moment, but can we circle back?
Sure.
And the more we circle back and be intentional about that, the sooner we'll get to a point where in the moment we're going to be able to do that.
And would you say that's a fair and good thing to do of like, hey, this is, because I tend to say, hey, sometimes this moment is not the moment, but you have to honor each other by coming back and addressing it. So it is a reminder of, hey, you don't really need, this is not the moment, like recognizing that neither one of us are in the place to do what we need to do. But so let's table it, but we do have to
give ourselves a timeout. Let's love ourselves enough to calm down.
Which I think is important, because I think sometimes people misuse that verse, don't let the sun go down in your anger, so they think we have to do this like right now. And I feel like, no, what the Lord is saying is deal with it. Don't let it fester. Don't create more lies in your mind with where time goes by, where you actually never deal with it. And you're like, oh, we don't need to deal with it because I think we're fine now.
And well, let's admit it. Usually when we're at that point, the sun's already down. So you have 24 hours until the sun has to go down again. Right. So just roll with it for a while.
I like that. I love that. The sun's already down.
If the sun's already down, you've got 24 hours before you got another shot at this thing.
That's
so
good.
Sleep on it, feel better, and then go, let's work it out before the sun goes down. And let's repair. Let's love each other enough to repair.
That's good. I love that. I think that's actually a great quote to end on. Love each other enough to repair.
Yeah,
that's a great word. So thanks, Perry, for being with us again. Again, we could talk probably for hours, but this is enough right?
Yeah, that's good.
And so appreciate you, and thanks for all that you're doing to care for not only our community but beyond, and look forward to having more of these chats with you. So
Thanks for having
thanks
me.
again.
Appreciate it.
Thanks again. If you want to get connected to Perry, we have all of his information connected to this video, as well as you can connect with us at Red Mountain, and we'd love to connect you with Perry as well as one of our Christian counseling partners. So thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to doing more of these videos and helping you build spirit-filled homes where you are. Sweet.